My favorite Canadian fairy tale justice films are always the ones I'm working on right now. Currently, that's Canadian director, writer, and producer Mary Herron's 2011 movie, The Moth Diaries. It's about teenage girls' friendships, but also about suicide and a lonely vampire who searches for company at a boarding school. Vampire Ernessa is a thorn in the side of her schoolmate, Rebecca. Both young women have lost their fathers to suicide, and Ernessa wants Rebecca to face the damage her father did to her, instead of remembering sweet, happy fairy tales. The vampire reminds Rebecca the story of the juniper tree, also called the almond tree. Ernessa sings the song of the bird, spirit of a child murdered by his stepmother. My mother butchered me, my father ate me. Suddenly it starts raining blood. The Moth Diaries links crimes and harms with the supernatural, as well as exploring the effects of suicide on families. Watch this movie.
One of my all-time favorites is Eric Kenuel's 2006 film, Bone Cop, Bad Cop. It's a Canadian version of the buddy cop movie, which is the tale of two very different police officers forced to team up and solve a crime. This genre was a huge hit for Hollywood in the 80s and 90s. Kenuel's Canadian spin on this odd couple storyline is that one cop is from Quebec and the other is from Ontario. This leads to a few cool things. Bone Cop, Bad Cop bounces back and forth between Montreal and Toronto, showcasing two of Canada's largest cities instead of dressing them up to look like somewhere else, which happens a lot. In addition, the movie's bilingual. The characters speak both French and English and switch between them all the time. Be sure to pay attention when Bouchard schools Ward on the best Quebec profanities. And if that wasn't enough, it's a funny and fast-paced action movie. It starts with a dead body draped over the Welcome to Ontario sign on the border between the provinces, and only gets better from there. Car chases and foot races and shootouts and explosions and a Zamboni. I love this film.
One of my favorite Canadian crime films set and filmed in a Canadian city is the 2001 picture Claire, directed by groundbreaking Toronto New Wave director Bruce McDonald. It follows Claire, who leaves her burning apartment and former life as a petty criminal turned police informant in Montreal to pursue Billy, a photographer and ex-lover who lives in Toronto's edgy, culturally diverse Kensington market. Claire finds herself in the wrong place at the wrong time, mistaken for a chick gangster involved in a diamond heist. Chased by police and thugs, a confused French-speaking Claire eventually takes charge and finds her own way, all in a pair of bright red heels. I love this movie's genre-bending art film meets caper movie aesthetic. Multiple split-screen scenes, flashbacks, daydream-like black and white moments, along with jazzy music by Saint Germain, make the film a pleasure to watch. It provides us with rich street-level views of Kensington Market neighborhood. Picture Claire blurs the boundaries between art and crime. When Claire sees her stolen image displayed in an art gallery, she destroys it. Is the crime her damage to the work or the use of her face without permission? Strong female characters include a competent lead female detective along with Claire, who uses her street smarts to navigate the market, art worlds, and criminal scenarios that she encounters. The film's ending questions conventional notions of justice. A shot of Claire on a tropical beach, supposedly with the diamonds, suggests that what matters is motive. She gets away with her crimes. As MacDonald himself reflects, she was pure of heart. She gets to be rewarded.
If I had to pick a favorite Canadian crime film, I would have to go with the 1989 Mob Story. Directed by rookie Winnipeg filmmakers Gabriel and Giancarlo Marchiu, this was the first really big film that I had ever seen made in my hometown of Winnipeg. Mob Story features some big-name Canadian actors who were well-known in Hollywood: John Vernon, Al Waxman, and Margot Kidder. But most importantly, it stars Winnipeg, or more accurately, Winnipeg's winter. The story revolves around a big city New York mob boss who flees the feds and some other bad guys and hides out in Winnipeg. It turns out an old romantic flame runs an Italian restaurant in the city's Little Italy. The movie plays on all the stereotypes about Winnipeg's winter, and in the end, it's the cold weather that defeats the bad guys. This film has it all. Car chases down wintry streets, people freezing to death at bus stops, and a bad guy whose tongue becomes frozen to the barrel of his gun because, it's really, really cold in Winnipeg. In my opinion, Mob Story is a lost classic of Canadian crime cinema.
Looking at fairy tale television, I'm very interested in how many are police procedurals. You might think the American show Grimm is the only fairy tale police procedural, but there are tons of others, including the Australian-German kids animation The Fairy Tale Police Department and the made-in-Canada series Beauty and the Beast. And like so many other shows, the legal procedural Burden of Truth, starring Kristen Crook, who's also the Beauty and the Beast, sometimes cites fairy tales. The episode The Rabbit Hole alludes to the route by which Alice arrives in Wonderland. But why fairy tales and procedurals? Because the two forms share an interest in morality and responsibility, and it's fascinating to see exactly how each show works through these issues. So look for fairy tales and fairy tale references in films and TV. You just might find them in some unexpected places.
In the case of the made-for-TV mystery movie, I talked about the surprising absence of women detectives in Canadian crime films, unless you're watching Hallmark movies. But there are lots of women investigators on Canadian TV. They're key players in cop dramas like Global TV's Rookie Blue and CTV's Flashpoint, which explore issues of crime and justice in contemporary urban policing. We can also watch characters like CBC's Frankie Drake run her own private investigation agency in Toronto in the 1920s, a time period with very different attitudes about girl bosses than what we see today. And I'm most excited about chick detectives in science fiction and fantasy television. We've got the showcase series Lost Girl. In it, we meet Bo, a succubus who works as a private eye for supernatural clients, since they clearly can't go to the cops when they're in trouble without revealing that creatures like werewolves and Valkyrie are real. There's also Space's show Blood Ties, based on a series of novels by Canadian writer Tanya Huff, in which Vicki Nelson, a cop-turned-private eye, teams up with a centuries-old vampire to keep the streets safe from extraordinary threats, like Wendigo, Medusa, and demons. These urban fantasies give us the chance to reflect on our concepts of crime and justice, because if we can imagine that vampires and elves and werewolves are real, we can also imagine different ways of thinking about morality, criminality, and community. And if we can imagine different ways of organizing our social world, we're one step closer to changing it.
Continuing with my focus on the urban imaginary, I'm going to look at how television crime series reflect and shape ideas about Canadian cities and the people who inhabit them. For example, the procedural crime drama 1902, set in Montreal, provides us with a complex picture of the city as a modern cosmopolitan metropolis. I'm intrigued with how such representations shape urban imaginaries, the ways in which we understand, come to know, and experience Canadian cities and urban life.
In the case of the Canuck Cop film, I explored how films about Canadian policing have shifted from the historic Western frontier to the urban areas of Canada and to digital frontiers. Going forward, I'm interested in looking at the depiction of Canadian policing in modern rural environments. The Small Town Cop is a feature of several well-loved Canadian TV programs, including The Beachcombers and Corner Gas. I'm also really interested in how Canadian film and TV represent issues of punishment, including the prison and the release of offenders into the community post-sentence. A good example is Poor Boy's Game from 2007, which is equal parts boxing film and story of release and redemption. Lastly, I'm looking at films and television that deal with justice in supernatural contexts. For example, I examined the classic 1980 Canadian horror film, The Changeling, as a meditation on justice from beyond the grave. Be afraid, very afraid.